We have had a change to the program, as I mentioned before. And before I go into the next part of what we're going to present now, I just want to remind you that, first of all, we do have that hashtag TIPS 2018 if you are on social media, on Twitter. Because this has been broadcast beyond this room, it's going regionally and internationally, there are some people who would be following on Twitter and social media to see what you're thinking about everything that you're hearing as it's happening. So please use that hashtag. We also still would welcome your questions. So if you're listening to a session or a presenter, or there's something that's really on your brain, whether you're in this room or watching us from a screen somewhere else, send your questions to questions@sanctumservices.com, and we will answer those as we go along, or also later on when we have our forum session. I would now like to introduce our next speaker, who is Dr. Tim McDonald. Oh, before I do that, the program is actually online, so if you are watching us from somewhere else, you're streaming through. If you go to yakwa.org.au, there is a link to the program so you can see all the speakers, the timings that we've set, even though there's been a bit of tweaking here and there. So our very next speaker is Dr. Tim McDonald, and he has had a very long and successful career, most recently as the Executive Director of Catholic Education in Western Australia. Tim has recently been appointed as CEO of Generation One, working to end the disparity between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. Please, could you welcome to the stage Dr. Tim McDonald.
Thank you, Taku, and thank you for the welcome. First up, thank you to Liz. Thank you for your heartfelt story and sharing your pain around your community at the moment. And aren't they lucky to have someone of that strength, that courage, to walk the streets and walk the community to support that community. So thank you. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners and the traditional custodians on the land that we meet today, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and those emerging, and also acknowledge the Aboriginal colleagues in the room today. Quite a daunting task to follow, Liz. I think that's why Cheryl switched it around possibly, but happy to follow. And it is a pleasure to be here today. As Taku said, the CEO of Generation One, and I'll just explain what Generation One is. Generation One is an initiative out of the Minderoo Foundation. The Minderoo Foundation is the philanthropic arm of Andrew and Nicola Forrest, or Twiggy. And so he's put money aside for philanthropic works. And nothing Andrew does is small scale, because Generation One's job is to end disparity for Aboriginal people across Australia. The other initiative that Minderoo has is to eliminate cancer. So there's Eliminate Cancer initiative, working for brain tumour and brain cancer in particular, and also raising the smoking age up to 21. It also has a Thrive by 5 initiative, and that's the early years work that they do. And your minister, Simone McGurk, launched a partnership with Minderoo the other day in the Early Years Initiative with the Telethon Kids Institute as well. Then there is the incredibly successful, I'm just amazed, I didn't realise this world existed, the Walk Free Society. They're looking at ending human trafficking and ending human slavery. And they've just launched their Commonwealth report in the House of Commons and also at Choggum a week or so ago. Phenomenal work. And then there is the arts and culture arm to Minderoo, as well as the Forest Scholars. And so you'll see that new building that's near University of WA is all around giving opportunities for the best and the brightest in the world to come to WA to help solve some of our intractable problems. And then, of course, as you'll well know, because hopefully you're all going, there's the rugby team. And the rugby starts tonight, is the first game. So Andrew's now bought a rugby team, and I marvel at Minderoo what they can do in 3 months to go from no players to having 30 players signed and now having a competition and the first match tonight. So that's Minderoo. It's a phenomenally active hub in which to work, and it's a pleasure to be there, but it's also a pleasure to work there, but also to be here today. Why I'm interested in today is because I think it's an important symposium, proposing a new lens to view children and our response to children, as well as a new way of doing policy implementation for authentic impact. And it's the latter part of that I would like to talk to today. And I was hang on. No, it's my fault. I'll turn it on. No. Can we go back? Okay. There should be a question on the screen that you could read, and we can... Here we go. Because one of the questions, and I was really interested in hearing what Jackie was saying, that it's all about a new paradigm. And I've put there provocative proposal. It shouldn't really be provocative, but in a policy churn that happens in human services and a policy churn that happens in my previous experience in education, it is a provocative statement, because how do we get policy? How do we ensure that the policy has impact? When I listen to Howard and the immense knowledge and wisdom that he has, and I look at the program that we have here today, and I would like to acknowledge three of the speakers because I know their work best. And I would like to acknowledge Howard, would like to acknowledge Paul and also Simon. I'm indebted, personally and professionally, to their work, but also incredibly humbled to be sharing a stage with amazing people and their knowledge, their content and their practical implementation of theory into practice and giving new life to new work to our most vulnerable. So I'd like to thank you for making the effort and journey over here to WA, but it also makes me humbled to be on the same stage. I'm also aware that there's lots of content today. There's much content to digest and much challenging concepts to wrangle with. So I'd like to shift gear. I'd like to shift gear a bit, and what I would like to do is to lean into my own experience of leadership and the quest to transform a system, and share three key learnings around trying to put policy into practice. Thank you very much. So that's what I'd like to do, lean into my own experience of leadership and talk about three key learnings to put into practice. Now, my story is an incomplete one, because I didn't see the transformation come to fruition. And I have no doubt that my reflection will be incomplete too. I was appointed into the CEO role of an education system on an innovation agenda. When my appointment was announced, it highlighted the need for education to change, particularly this system, and indeed my national and international experience was seen as a positive, or was seen to provide a positive and innovative platform on which to make change. The call for education to transform was again highlighted this week with the release of the Gonski 2.0 report. It highlights that we need to move from an outdated factory form of education to one that is more personalised and meets the needs of young people. Nearly all of you, if not all of you, have been saying that for years in your role, that education needs to change to have a young person's, their needs focused. I came into the role with a vision of a system where all people flourished. A system where children were at the centre in more than a rhetorical way. A system where parents were woven and integral to the school community and they were respected as the child's first educator. A system where teachers flourished as professional learners who were curious to learn more about their art and their craft, and also to understand more the evidence of their impact on students' learning and their lives. We got another one? No, it's okay. Possibly that was utopian, but children deserve a vision worth driving hard for, and a clear expectation that we will work hard towards this goal. If we're not dreaming for our children, who will? I've got skin in the game. I've got 5 children, or had then 5 children, I still got 5, but had 5 in 3 different schools. And like any parent, I was keen to know that, did the teacher know my child? Did they know if they were happy or not? Were they curious to know how to engage them in learning? And did they understand the hook that got my child curious to learn more? Did the teacher have a positive relationship with my child? Was my child safe? Were they connected? And were they building their resilience in that classroom? I was keen for our executive leadership team to embrace our collective skin in the game and be driven for better outcomes for all children in our schools. At the executive decision-making level, we had to know that our decisions were contributing to all students flourishing. To this end, I used my youngest child, Charlie, who at the time was starting schools in pre-primary, as a lens to view our decision-making. I wanted all decisions to pass the Charlie test. Is this decision, this resource allocation, the appointment of a new staff member, going to contribute to all the Charlies in our schools flourishing? Because if not, then we need to rethink our decision. The child had to be at the core of all that we do. Throughout the early part of my role as CEO, I was driven by a sense of urgency. Now, urgency, in John Cotter's use of it, that we needed to overcome inertia by cultivating a bias for action. We needed to paint a picture that change was not optional, that the status quo would reproduce the status quo, because we knew that learning in the 21st century required fundamentally a different set of capacities. To deliver this, I believe that there was also a realisation that organisationally we needed to shift how we did business. General Stanley McChrystal notes in his book Team of Teams that the army the US had for Iraq and Afghanistan was superbly equipped to fight an enemy that didn't exist. Someone forgot to tell Al-Qaeda to follow the rules, because the war against an enemy playing by a digital, non-hierarchical and constantly shape-shifting rulebook forced the US military to rethink strategy and to team differently. Simply put, the world has changed. To flourish, I believe the organisation needed to be more agile and to team differently to the world that we were working in, and poignantly, the world that our students would live in and work in. This need to change is with all of our organisations now, and we must meet it if, in this age of disruption, as Otto Scharmer calls it, we want to stop collectively creating results that none of us wants. A lot of thought, professional energy and research to test our assumptions went into this change vision. There was confidence that the vision was necessary and it had a strong moral purpose. But key learning number 1, being right is not a strategy. I can say that now because Liz is not here. Quoting Rob Riley. And a clear destination needs to be matched with a clear plan for the journey. Thank you. Being right wasn't a strategy. My second leadership learning is that it is dangerous to read silence as agreement. My default stance was to read silence as agreement in leadership meetings, and in group meetings, and in individual conversations. On deeper reflection, I now know that even agreement is not necessarily agreement. Because agreement must be based on clarity. Now, I've struggled to find a word to explain why so often we left the decision-making forum without clarity, with confused agreement or assumed agreement. Was I complacent? Was I too impatient for action? Was I too enthusiastic or passionate to allow another person's confusion to be spoken? Was I too fervent or dominant in my language? I don't know. But there's another word, and one that I think most in this room would find really hard to apply to yourselves. Was I lazy? Was I too caught up in the outcome to pay the requisite attention to the details of engagement and clarity that the group would need to follow through our decisions? I mean, the devil is always in the detail, but I didn't always go to meet him there. I think others were lazy too. Let me explain that. I don't assume lazy intent. We all worked hard. But in relation to transformation and policy impact, there's no point working hard on things that don't matter. I'm describing here a disposition at all levels. It's not about leadership, this is about anyone that's involved in policy transformation. To opt out of the conversation and to wait for clarity as if it was up to... My default stance was to read silence as agreement in leadership meetings, and in group meetings, and in individual conversations. On deeper reflection, I now know that even agreement is not necessarily agreement. Because agreement must be based on clarity. Now, I've struggled to find a word to explain why so often we left the decision-making forum without clarity, with confused agreement or assumed agreement. Was I complacent? Was I too impatient for action? Was I too enthusiastic or passionate to allow another person's confusion to be spoken? Was I too fervent or dominant in my language? I don't know. But there's another word, and one that I think most in this room would find really hard to apply to yourselves. Was I lazy? Was I too caught up in the outcome to pay the requisite attention to the details of engagement and clarity that the group would need to follow through our decisions? I mean, the devil is always in the detail, but I didn't always go to meet him there. I think others were lazy too. Let me explain that. I don't assume lazy intent. We all worked hard. But in relation to transformation and policy impact, there's no point working hard on things that don't matter. I'm describing here a disposition at all levels. This is not about leadership, this is about anyone that's involved in policy transformation. To opt out of the conversation and to wait for clarity as if it was up to someone else to mail it to you, addressed and packaged neatly. To engage in important discussions is effortful. To seek clarity is effortful. To learn takes effort, volition and will. I accepted silence as if we had unanimous agreement with laser beam clarity. I misread the silence. Which leads me to my third key learning. And I know this is an understatement. It's an understatement to say that it's important to understand the cultural nuances of an organisation. And all of us are well versed that culture will always eat strategy for breakfast, as Drucker tells us. Culture will eat leadership too, slowly and with relish, and perhaps even with good manners. And so you see my third key learning. That neither strong vision nor good strategy have a chance without a culture of authentic engagement. I understand clearly now the importance of cultural sensitivity. This is Goldman's work and focus. Cultural sensitivity to the context in which you lead. Put bluntly, if you can't read the place, you can't lead it. In relation to workplace culture, I have an emerging hypothesis that People don't readily bring truth to power. Even senior, experienced and intelligent people. Silence is more palatable and easier than truth. And I haven't quite figured out this next part yet, but I'm going to share raw thoughts and reflections. If the workplace culture is already one of low trust, how can any leader develop cultural sensitivity? Because I needed people to comment on my leadership behaviour and how I was being perceived or coming across as a leader. We all need this feedback in the workplace for our own growth. We think of the feedback that we get in our relationships. Through that feedback, our greater learning of ourselves happens, but also our personal growth. So I wonder what stopped them. What stops others in the workplace? What made this difficult? And would I have heard them anyway if they had spoken up? What in me made this difficult? But leaders can't hear what is not being said. They need open disagreement. This is why I love Obama and his action when he appointed Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State after he had battled with her for 18 months in the preliminaries to become the President of the United States. When asked why he did this, he replied he wanted a team of rivals, a construct he'd understood from his reading into the presidency of Lincoln. Only this team reality of rivals would robustly prepare him to argue for the best outcomes for all Americans. Feedback and the absence of feedback shapes leadership behaviour. We often talk about leadership and organisations in terms of agility and flexibility. It's hard to know you have to change direction if the feedback is telling you to only go one way. Effective cultures bring truth to power. Effective power allows this to happen. The journey of leadership is iterative and demands self-awareness and a willing to struggle forward. I hope that this reflection on my leadership learnings will enable me to draw on more internal resources so that I can continue to make better decisions and to be an authentic leader in my present role and other roles to come. I take to my new role at Generation 1, at least 3, if not many, learnings about how to land policy and to lead effective change for impact. That being right is not a strategy, that silence is not agreement, and that agreement is only useful when it's accompanied by clarity of strategic action. And that even strong vision and the right strategy depend fundamentally on creating the conditions for an authentic and powerful engagement. If we're to bring about a new way of policy work for young people through big bureaucracies, then I think standing up here, wouldn't it be great as I look out to the amazing amount of expertise and wisdom that sits in front of me, if we could somehow collect the leading change learnings in this room. Can you imagine the impact on the policy agenda that we care so much about? It would be phenomenal, and that change can happen with all of us. I hope that my 3, incomplete as they are, will have resonated with you in some way, in your organisation, reaffirmed your own journey, and perhaps provoked your thinking in some way, so that we can collectively lead a paradigm shift that Jackie spoke about, required so that we can serve better our most vulnerable in communities. Thank you.